At Thanksgiving dinner, my father looked at my disabled son and said, "We won't fund medical care for this little brat." We were gathered around my parents' dining table in Scottsdale on Thanksgiving. My father placed a manila folder next to the gravy boat. He announced it contained the cashier's check for my son Emil's upcoming spinal fusion. But before handing it over, he slid a legally binding consent form for a 90-day extreme behavioral modification camp across the tablecloth. My mother stared at her wine glass. "We just need to be absolutely certain," my father declared, "before we waste a fortune on a boy who is unmanageable." My grandfather Werner slammed his silverware down so hard the crystal rattled. Emil looked up with terrified eyes, instinctively rubbing his curved spine. I demanded to know what my parents were doing. My mother piped up, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Mia, his outbursts are unnatural. My husband, Lucas, was in the kitchen carving the turkey." My father chimed in. "He's disturbed. We won't fund medical care until his mental defects are fixed." Grandpa Werner shoved his chair back. "Are you out of your minds?" My mother launched into a tirade about how Emil's occasional anger over his chronic back pain was actually a symptom of deep sociopathy. I was paralyzed. Emil was absorbing every toxic syllable. Lucas walked into the dining room, holding a serving platter, and froze. Emil immediately bolted and buried his face in Lucas's chest. Lucas didn't ask questions. He took one look at the legal document, dropped the platter, and guided Emil toward the front door. I told my parents we were leaving. My mother lunged for my wrist. "Don't walk out over a simple boundary." Grandpa Werner announced he was leaving with us. My father scoffed. "Dad, sit down. You don't have a say." Grandpa Werner stepped into his space. "Every dime you have came from my company. I am calling my broker on Monday, and your trust fund is being completely dissolved." My father's arrogant smirk vanished. My parents had lived lavishly off my grandfather's real estate empire for decades. Grandpa Werner ignored him and turned to me. "Go to the hall closet, Mia. Grab the steel lockbox. The combination is 1104. My father physically panicked, lunging to block the hallway, but Lucas shoved him aside. I grabbed the heavy gray box, punched in the numbers, and popped the lid right there on the dining table. Inside wasn't a confession. It was a stack of sealed psychiatric evaluations and juvenile detention records from 1988. They belonged to my father. Grandpa Werner looked at my mother, who was now hyperventilating. "Your father didn't go to boarding school in Switzerland," he told me. "He spent 4 years in a high-security lockdown facility after deliberately setting fire to a neighbor's property. He is a diagnosed malignant narcissist. We spent millions burying the records so he could get into college." He pointed a shaking finger at my dad. "He has spent his adult life projecting his sickness onto anyone weaker than him." I stayed quiet because I thought he was cured. But demanding to lock up a child in agonizing physical pain? You haven't changed. We walked out and never looked back. I sold my car and took out a personal loan to pay for Emil's spinal fusion. He is recovering beautifully. 4 months later, my father faced a total career collapse. The behavioral camp he wanted to send Emil to was raided by federal authorities for extreme abuse, and my father was exposed as a silent financial backer facing federal indictment. He showed up at my house in May, begging for money for a defense attorney. I didn't let him inside. I just handed him the same behavioral camp consent form he had pushed on my son, closed the door, and locked the deadbolt. The silence that followed the click of that deadbolt was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For a minute, I just leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, listening to his muffled shouting from the porch. He wasn't even pretending to be the polished, successful real estate mogul anymore. He sounded like a cornered animal. Lucas came into the hallway, drying his hands on a kitchen towel, and just put a hand on my shoulder. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't, but he also knew I was done. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and avoiding the local news. The indictment wasn't just a headline for us. It was a wrecking ball. Because Grandpa Werner had followed through on dissolving the trust, my parents had no liquidity. They had the house in Scottsdale, a sprawling, 5-bedroom mid-century modern place that cost $40,000 a month just to keep the AC running, and they had the cars, but they had no cash. And the legal fees for a federal indictment involving unregulated juvenile correctional facilities are astronomical. My mother started calling, not from her cell, because she'd stopped paying that bill, but from the landline at the house. At first, it was the usual, "How could you do this to your family?" routine. Then it shifted. She started sending me photos of her jewelry laid out on their velvet bedspread. "I'm selling the Cartier bracelet your father gave me for our 20th anniversary, she texted. "I hope you're happy knowing your mother is destitute." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Every time I felt a flicker of guilt, I looked at Emil. He was sitting on the sofa, his back straight for the first time in his life, reading a book about dinosaurs. The surgery had been a miracle, but the recovery was long. He still had nightmares about the camp. He didn't know the details of what my father had planned, but he knew the tone of his voice that Thanksgiving. He knew he had been traded for a check. In June, Grandpa Werner moved out of his assisted living facility and into a small guest cottage on a friend's ranch. He told me he couldn't stand the thought of my father knowing where he lived. One afternoon I went to visit him, and he was sitting on the porch with a legal pad, writing down names. "What's that, Grandpa?" I asked, setting down a bag of peaches I'd brought him. "A list of people your father owes money to," he said without looking up. His voice was raspy but clear. "Not just banks, Mia. People. Contractors he stiffed on his developments. Former assistants he harassed into signing NDAs. If the feds are going to dig, I'm going to give them a map." I sat down in the wicker chair next to him. "Aren't you tired? You've spent 40 years protecting him." "That's why I'm not tired," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were watery but sharp. "I'm making up for lost time. I thought I was being a good father by hiding his nature. I was just feeding the beast. I won't let him take you down with him." He handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a bank statement. Not his, but a joint account I didn't know existed. "This is for Emil's college and his physical therapy. Don't tell your mother. She thinks I've spent it all on my own care." The total was enough to change our lives 3 times over. I started to cry, and Werner just patted my hand. But the destitution my mother claimed was a half-truth. By July, I found out they weren't just selling jewelry. They were trying to sell the Scottsdale house, but there was a massive lien on it that my father had hidden. He had used the house as collateral for a private loan to fund the very camp that was now his downfall. The lender was a boutique investment firm that specialized in high-interest, high-risk ventures, the kind of people who don't care about a federal indictment as long as they get their property. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize while I was at the grocery store. It was my mother, but she sounded different, hysterical. "Mia, they're here," she whispered. "There are men in the driveway. driveway, not the police. They're changing the locks on the gate. Your father is locked in the study and won't come out. Mom, call the police if you're scared, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. He says we can't. He says if the police come, they'll find the other files. Mia, please, just talk to Werner. Tell him to wire the money. It's only $200,000. That's nothing to him. It's over, Mom, I said. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the carton of eggs I was holding. I can't help you. Werner won't help you. You're going to let us sleep on the street? She shrieked. I hung up. I stood in the middle of the dairy aisle for 5 minutes, just breathing. People pushed their carts past me, annoyed that I was blocking the yogurt. They had no idea that my family was imploding 2 towns over. When I got home, Lucas was in the driveway. He looked pale. Your dad's lawyer called, he said. The indictment just got upgraded. They found evidence of money laundering through the camp's offshore accounts. And Mia, they think he was tipped off about the raid. By who? I asked. Lucas looked at the house, making sure Emil wasn't at the window. They don't know, but your father is telling everyone it was you. He's claiming you stole documents from that lockbox and sold them to a competitor. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I hadn't sold anything. I hadn't even looked at those papers since the night of the surgery. They were sitting in a safe deposit box at my bank. He's trying to make me the villain, I whispered. He's trying to make you the reason he goes to prison, Lucas corrected. Because if it's your fault, he doesn't have to face what he actually did. The next morning, a man in a cheap suit knocked on our door. He wasn't a Fed, he was a process server. My father was suing me for defamation and theft of proprietary business information. The lawsuit was a joke, a desperate, flailing attempt to freeze my assets or scare Grandpa Werner into a settlement. But it meant I had to hire a lawyer. It meant Emil's recovery was interrupted by depositions. It meant the peace we had fought so hard for was being poisoned by a man who couldn't accept that the world didn't revolve around his needs. We were sitting in my lawyer's office a week later when she dropped a heavy folder on the desk. Your father's legal team is pushing for a discovery phase that includes Emil's medical records, she said, her face tight with disgust. They want to prove that the brat, their word, used in a private email I recovered was never actually in need of surgery, and that you used the stolen money for a lifestyle upgrade. Lucas stood up, his chair flying backward. He wants to put our son on trial to save his own skin. He wants to win, she said simply. And he knows this is the one thing that will break you. I looked at the folder. Inside were copies of emails my father had sent to his business partners over the last year. In one, dated 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, he wrote, "The boy is a sunk cost. If we can't fix the behavior, we stop the repairs. Mia needs to learn that resources are for those who produce." I didn't cry this time. I felt a strange vibrating stillness. What do we do? I asked. We don't just defend, my lawyer said. We countersue. But Mia, to do that, we have to open up everything. Not just his crimes. Your childhood. Everything Werner told you about that lockdown facility in 1988. We have to prove a pattern of lifelong abuse and projection. I thought about my mother's face when Grandpa Werner opened that box. I thought about the smell of the smoke from the neighbor's house my father had burned down when he was 17. I thought about the way he used to look at me when I brought home a B on a report card like I was a faulty piece of equipment. Do it, I said. 2 days later, the men in the driveway at my parents' house finally won. The bank foreclosed. My parents were given 48 hours to vacate the Scottsdale mansion. My mother called me one last time. She wasn't screaming. She sounded small, like a child. "We're at the La Quinta on Shea Boulevard," she said. "Your father is. He's not talking. He just sits in the chair and watches the news. He won't even eat." "Where is the money, Mom?" I asked. "The money he laundered? It's gone," she whispered. "The lawyers took the last of it as a retainer. We have 3 suitcases and a bag of jewelry that no one will buy because the stones are blood diamonds from one of his old African developments. Mia, please, just one night. Let me come over and see Emil." I looked over at Emil. He was working on a puzzle. He looked happy. He looked safe. "No," I said. "He's your father," she sobbed. "He's a man who wanted to put my son in a cage," I said. "And you're the woman who was going to let him." I hung up and blocked the number, but the relief didn't come because that evening, a black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of our house and just sat there. It didn't belong to the police. It didn't belong to the feds. Lucas went out to the porch, his hand on his phone, ready to call 911. The driver's side window rolled down. It was a man I recognized from my father's old office, his fixer, a guy named Marcus who handled the messy parts of the real estate deals. "I'm not here for trouble," Marcus said, his voice low. He handed a thick envelope out the window. "Your dad is losing it. He's started talking about leveling the playing field. He thinks if he's going down, everyone goes down. Werner, you, the kid." Lucas took the envelope. "What is this?" "Names, dates, the real books for the camp," Marcus said. "I'm getting out before the feds bring the hammer down. Your father thinks I'm shredding this. I'm not. Give it to your lawyer. Just tell her it came from an anonymous source." He rolled up the window and drove away. Lucas brought the envelope inside. We sat at the kitchen table and spread the papers out. It wasn't just money laundering. It was a list of donors, other wealthy parents in the valley who had sent their kids to that camp, people we knew, people we saw at the country club. My father wasn't just a backer. He was a blackmailer. He was keeping records of every difficult child and every hushed-up incident to keep his partners in line. And right at the top of the list, under a tab marked pending, was Emil's name. My father hadn't just wanted to fix Emil. He wanted to use Emil as his ultimate collateral. If his own grandson was in the system, he was untouchable. No one would ever suspect him of wrongdoing if he was suffering through the same program. As we were reading, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I see the lights are on, Mia. The lockbox wasn't yours to take. I'm coming to get what's mine." I looked at the front door. I looked at the deadbolt. I realized then that my father wasn't just a narcissist or a failed businessman. He was someone who had spent his whole life building a fortress of lies. And now that it was crumbling, he was going to make sure the debris hit everyone on the way down. "Lucas," I said, my voice steady despite the ice in my veins. "Call the lawyer. Tell her the discovery phase is over. We have everything." But then the porch light flickered and went out. Then the street lights. The entire block went dark. I heard a car door slam, not a fancy SUV, but a cheap rental. gentle. Footsteps on the gravel. Not fast, not running. Just a slow, deliberate walk toward our front porch. I grabbed Emil and pulled him into the hallway, away from the windows. Lucas stood by the door, his heart visible through his shirt. The doorknob turned. Once, twice, then a heavy thud, like a shoulder hitting the wood. Mia, my father's voice came through the cracks, sounding eerily calm. Open the door. We need to have a conversation about family loyalty. I've lost my house. I've lost my name. I'm not losing that box. I didn't answer. I just held Emil tighter. I know Werner gave you the other account, he shouted, his voice cracking now. I know he did. Give me the login, or I swear to God, I'll tell the feds you were the one who signed the incorporation papers for the camp. I forged your signature months ago, Mia. You're on the board. You're going down with me. My breath caught. I looked at Lucas. He was already dialing, but his face told me the truth. My father was capable of exactly that. He had spent years as a developer. He knew how to hide a signature in a mountain of paperwork. The banging on the door got louder. Open it! He screamed. Then, suddenly, the banging stopped. I heard a different voice. Calm, old. Step away from the door, son. It was Werner. He must have followed him. Dad, get out of here, my father hissed. This doesn't concern you. Everything I built concerns me, Werner said. And I built you, which means I know exactly how to dismantle you. The feds are already at the La Quinta, looking for you. I told them where you'd be. You sold me out? My father's voice was a high-pitched whine now. I saved my family, Werner replied. Something you never understood how to do. I heard the sound of a struggle, the scuffle of shoes on the porch, a grunt, and then the distant wail of a siren. My father started to run. I could hear his footsteps hitting the driveway, but he didn't get far. The sirens grew louder, flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the living room walls through the blinds. We stayed in the hallway for a long time, even after the yelling stopped, even after the police radio chatter faded. Eventually, Werner knocked softly on the door. It's okay, Mia. He's gone. I opened the door. My grandfather was standing there, looking older than he ever had, his cardigan rumpled. In the street, the police were putting my father into the back of a cruiser. He wasn't fighting anymore. He just looked small. Werner looked at me, then at Emil, who was peeking from behind my legs. Is it over? Emil asked. Werner smiled, a sad, tired thing. For now, kiddo. For now. But as the police car pulled away, I saw my father's face through the window. He wasn't looking at the officers. He was looking at me. And he wasn't crying. He was smiling. The next morning, my lawyer called. Her voice was grave. Mia, I just got a call from the DA's office. Your father gave them a statement during processing. He's not fighting the laundering charges. He's pleading guilty. But he's doing it on one condition. What condition? I asked. He's turning over a second set of records, she said. Records, he says, prove that Grandpa Werner's company was built on the same kind of fraud 40 years ago. He's taking the whole legacy down, Mia. He's making sure that the money Werner gave you for Emil, it's all going to be seized as part of a racketeering investigation. I looked out the window at the garden I had just started planting. The sun was out, but the air felt cold. He'd rather destroy everything than let us have anything, I said. That's not the worst part, the lawyer continued. He's filed a petition with the court. He's claiming that due to your involvement in the camp's board, even if the signature was forged, you're an unfit parent. He's requested that Emil be placed in state custody until the investigation is complete. I felt the room spin. He can't do that, I whispered. He's in jail. He can't win, she said, but he can tie us up in court for years. He can make your life a living hell from inside a cell. Mia, he's not trying to get away anymore. He's just trying to make sure you never have a moment of peace again. I hung up the phone. Lucas was in the kitchen making breakfast. Emil was laughing at something on the TV. I walked over to the kitchen table and picked up the manila folder from Marcus. I started flipping through the pages, looking for something, anything, we could use. And then I saw it. A small, handwritten note tucked into the back of a ledger. It wasn't in my father's handwriting. It was in my mother's. He doesn't know I kept this. If he ever goes too far, use it. It was a copy of a birth certificate. Not mine. Not Emil's. It was a birth certificate for a child born in 1989. A child my father had fathered while he was supposedly in that Swiss boarding school. A child he had abandoned and that Werner had paid to disappear. I realized then that the malignant narcissist diagnosis wasn't the only secret Werner had been keeping. I picked up the phone and called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Mom, I said, my voice like iron. Tell me about the other child. There was a long silence on the other end, then a shaky breath. I thought he destroyed that, she whispered. He didn't, but I have it. And if you want to stay in that hotel instead of a prison cell for conspiracy, you're going to tell me exactly where that person is. Because my father thinks he's the only one who can destroy a legacy. He's wrong. Her name is Evelyn, my mother finally whispered. The line was so quiet I could hear the hum of the ice machine in her hotel hallway. Evelyn Vance. She lives in Seattle. She's a nurse. I grabbed a blue marker from Emil's craft box on the table and wrote the name on the back of a junk mail envelope. My hand wasn't shaking. It was completely still. Did Werner know? I asked. Of course Werner knew, my mother said, her voice turning bitter. Who do you think paid the girl's mother to move out of state? Who do you think bought their silence? Your grandfather isn't a saint, Mia. He protected his brand, just like your father did. Don't compare them, I snapped. They're exactly the same, she fired back, finding a sudden burst of energy. Werner just uses a checkbook instead of a match. Evelyn's mother was a receptionist at the lockdown facility. Your father was 18, she was 24. When she got pregnant, Werner gave her $250,000 to disappear and never put his name on the certificate. I looked down at the birth certificate copy in the file. The space for the father's name was blank. Why did you keep this, Mom? She hesitated. Because I knew he was slipping. Your father. He's always had a sickness in him. I thought if he ever tried to divorce me and leave me with nothing, I could use it. I could show the board what kind of family man he really was. It was my insurance policy. You used a human being as an insurance policy. I did what I had to do to survive in that house, she cried. You have no idea what it was like, Mia. The moods, the demands, the way he would look at me if the house wasn't perfectly quiet when he got home. You gotta grow up and leave. I was stuck. You weren't stuck. You liked the credit cards. I hung up. I didn't wait for her to defend herself. I just stared at the name on the envelope. Evelyn Vance, a half-sister. A woman who was out there living her life, completely unaware that her biological father was sitting in a county jail, actively trying to destroy the rest of his family. Or maybe she did know. Lucas came over and set a mug of coffee in front of me. He looked at the envelope, then at the birth certificate. Who is Evelyn? He asked quietly. She's the reason we're going to win, I said. I didn't call Evelyn right away. I needed to talk to Werner first. I drove to his cottage on the ranch the next morning. The desert heat was already baking the asphalt, and the air smelled like dry sage. When I pulled up, Werner was sitting on his porch, drinking tea and reading a thick hardback biography. He looked peaceful. It made me angry. I walked up the wooden steps and dropped the copy of the birth certificate onto the small iron table between us. He didn't flinch. He just looked down at the paper, closed his book, and took a slow sip of his tea. "Your mother always was a pack rat," he said. "You bought a woman off for $250,000? I asked. I didn't yell. I just wanted the truth. Werner looked out toward the horizon, where the mountains were hazy with morning smog. It was 1,989. "Mia, your father had just gotten out of the facility. He was supposed to be starting fresh at college. Then I get a call from a terrified 24-year-old girl saying she's pregnant, and my son is threatening her. That made my blood run cold. Threatening her how? He told her if she tried to ruin his life, he'd burn her apartment down," Werner said flatly. And I knew he wasn't making an empty threat. He had already proven he was capable of it. So I flew out there. I sat down with her. I offered her a choice. Go to the police, risk him doing something unthinkable, and tie herself to a monster for the rest of her life. Or take the money, move away, and give the child a clean slate. He finally looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. It was a bone-deep weariness. I didn't buy her silence to protect him, Mia. I bought her silence to protect her and the baby. "And you never checked on them?" "I paid for her college," Werner said quietly, through a blind trust. "Evelyn went to nursing school. She's married. She has a little boy. I made sure she had everything she needed, as long as she stayed far away from the poison of this family." I sat down in the chair opposite him. My head was spinning. My father wasn't just a narcissist. He was a vacuum, sucking the air and the life out of everyone who came near him. And Werner had spent decades building containment walls around him. "He's trying to take Emil," I told him. "He filed a petition claiming I'm an unfit mother because my forged signature is on the camp's board documents. He wants Emil in state custody." Werner's jaw tightened. The peaceful old man vanished, replaced by the ruthless businessman who had built an empire from nothing. "He's using the legal system to bleed you dry," Werner said. "He knows custody battles take years. He knows the state will freeze your assets while they investigate. He wants you panicked." "It's working," I admitted, my voice cracking just a little. "Then we stop playing defense?" Werner said. He tapped the birth certificate. "Are you going to call her? I don't want to drag an innocent woman into this. Mia, your father is going to subpoena everything. The moment his lawyers realize the DA is looking into his past, they will find Evelyn. They will drag her onto the stand to prove I have a history of paying people off. They will use her to discredit me, and by extension, you. You need to warn her before the process servers show up at her hospital." He was right. I hated it, but he was right. I drove back home and locked myself in the home office. I found Evelyn Vance's number online in less than 10 minutes. She was a senior pediatric nurse at a hospital in downtown Seattle. I stared at the phone screen for a long time. What do you say to someone whose entire existence is a secret you just uncovered yesterday? I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. "This is Evelyn." Her voice was warm, professional. It sounded nothing like my father's. It sounded normal. "Evelyn, my name is Mia," I started. My mouth was dry. "You don't know me, but I think we share a father." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard a muffled voice in the background, like she was covering the receiver, telling someone she needed a minute. I heard a door click shut. "Who did you say you were?" she asked. Her tone completely changed. The warmth was gone. It was replaced by a rigid, practiced caution. "Mia, my grandfather is Werner." Another pause. Then a sharp sigh. "I told him never to contact me again." I blinked. "You told Werner?" "No," Evelyn said, her voice hardening. "I told times him. I told your father, when he showed up at my house 2 months ago. The air left my lungs. He went to Seattle? He showed up on my front porch in a rented Lincoln," she said, anger bleeding into her words now. "He told me he was going through a temporary liquidity crisis, and that since he was the reason I had a trust fund in the first place, I owed him a loan against my house. I told him to get off my property or I'd call the police. He called me an ungrateful little bitch and drove away." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. He didn't see a daughter. He saw an untapped ATM. "Evelyn, he's in jail," I said. "He's been indicted on federal charges." She didn't gasp. She didn't sound surprised. "Good. Why are you calling me, Mia?" I laid it all out. I told her about Thanksgiving. I told her about Emil's spine, the camp, the lockbox, the blackmail ledger. I told her about the custody petition he filed just to torture us. I didn't sugarcoat any of it. I treated her like an adult who had already seen the monster's face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He wanted to put a disabled child in a behavior camp for a discount on medical bills," she repeated slowly. "Yes. My mother told me what he was," Evelyn said softly. "She told me he was a black hole. She said if I ever went looking for him, I would lose pieces of myself. I never looked, but he found me anyway. He's going to find you again," I warned her. "His lawyers are going to drag you into this to prove Werner has a history of hiding crimes. I'm calling because I want you to be prepared. Get a lawyer, Evelyn. Don't let them blindside you." "I don't need a lawyer," she said. "You do. These people will destroy your reputation just to create reasonable doubt." "Mia," Evelyn interrupted, her voice suddenly very steady. "I said I don't need a lawyer because they aren't going to drag me into this. I'm going to walk in." "What do you mean?" "When he came to my house, he didn't just ask for money," she said. "He brought paperwork. He wanted me to sign a document making him a co-signer on my mortgage. He said it was a formality. I took a picture of it with my phone before I threw him out." "Did you read it?" "Yes. It wasn't just a mortgage document. It was a power of attorney form. If I had signed it, he would have had legal control over my son's college fund." She took a deep breath. "He targeted my kid, Mia, just like he targeted yours. Send me your lawyer's information. I'm flying to Arizona." I hung up the phone and felt a strange, heavy sense of relief. For my entire life, my father had isolated people. He picked us off one by one. He kept my mother dependent. He kept Werner managing his messes. He kept me feeling like I was never enough. He thrived on the fact that none of us ever talked to each other about what he was actually doing. Now, the walls were down. 3 days later, Evelyn walked into my lawyer's office. She looked like me. It was jarring. We had the same nose, the same dark hair, the same slight build, but she carried herself differently. She didn't have the permanent tension in her shoulders that I did. She had grown up outside the blast radius. She handed my lawyer a printed copy of the photo she had taken of the document. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Davis, adjusted her glasses and read it. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "This isn't just a power of attorney," Davis Davis said. It's a transfer of liability. He was trying to legally tie Evelyn to the offshore accounts he used for the camp. He was looking for a fall guy. Lucas leaned forward. Can we use it? We can absolutely use it, Davis said. It establishes a clear, documented pattern of him attempting to defraud his own children to cover his criminal liability. It completely blows up his narrative that you, Mia, were a willing participant in the camp's board. It shows his modus operandi. Davis looked at Evelyn. You understand that if we submit this, you become a matter of public record. The press will find out about you. Evelyn crossed her arms. Let them. My mother is gone. She passed away 5 years ago. He can't hurt her anymore, and I won't let him hurt my sister. She looked at me when she said it. Sister. The word felt strange, but it didn't feel wrong. We filed the counter petition the next morning. We included the document Evelyn provided, the blackmail ledger Marcus had dropped off, and Werner's sworn affidavit about the 1,988 lockdown facility and the subsequent payoffs. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was an absolute bombardment. That afternoon, I went to pick Emil up from physical therapy. He was walking on the treadmill, gripping the handrails, his face flushed with effort. The therapist was praising him, and he had a huge, proud smile on his face. I stood by the door watching him, feeling a fierce, protective heat in my chest. I wasn't going to lose him. Not to the state, not to my father, not to anyone. When we got to the car, my phone rang. It was an unrecognized local number. I assumed it was Davis with an update from the courthouse, so I answered it through the car's Bluetooth. Hello? You think you're very clever, don't you? It was my mother, but her voice was slurred, thick. Mom, I told you not to call me. I'm at the house, she said, her words dragged together. Your house, in the driveway. I hit the brakes hard at a stop sign, whipping my head around. We were still 3 miles from home. You need to leave, I told her, my heart rate spiking. Lucas is working from home today. If you're there, he will call the police. Lucas isn't here, she mumbled. I watched him drive away 20 minutes ago. Probably went to the grocery store. It's just me, and the front door is unlocked. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Lucas had gone to get Emil's prescription. He usually locked the door, but sometimes, if he was just running up the street. Mom, get out of my house, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Emil looked at me from the rearview mirror, sensing the shift in my tone. I just wanted to see where you live now, she said. There was the sound of a glass clinking against a countertop. She was in my kitchen. It's nice, smaller than I expected, considering Werner's money, but cozy. I found your little safe in the bedroom. Don't touch my things. I accelerated, pushing the speed limit. He's going to ruin us, Mia, she sobbed suddenly, the anger evaporating into raw panic. Your father's lawyers called me. They said since I knew about the camp's funding, I'm going to be indicted as a co-conspirator unless I turn state's evidence against him. But if I do that, he says he'll tell them I was the one who forged your signature. He's lying, I said. He forged it. He has an email from my account sending the PDF to the lawyers, she screamed, the sound echoing harshly through the car speakers. Emil covered his ears. He used my laptop while I was asleep. He set me up, Mia. He set me up so I couldn't testify against him. I pulled onto our street. I could see her car parked crookedly in our driveway. It was a cheap sedan she must have rented. I'm pulling up right now, I said. Come outside. I can't go to prison, she wept. I'm 62 years old. I don't know how to do anything. I don't even know how to pump my own gas, Mia. I parked on the street, not wanting to block her in. I turned to Emil. Stay in the car, honey. Keep the doors locked. I'll be right back. He nodded, his eyes wide. I walked up the driveway. The front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. My mother was sitting on the floor in the middle of my living room. She was wearing a designer silk blouse that was stained with spilled wine and sweatpants. She had a half-empty bottle of my cooking sherry in one hand. She looked pathetic. Stripped of the Scottsdale mansion, the catered dinners, and the country club memberships, she was just a terrified, hollowed-out woman. Get up, I said. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks. Help me, Mia. Tell your lawyer to help me. You want my help now? I asked, looking down at her. After you sat at Thanksgiving dinner and told me my son was a sociopath, after you tried to guilt me into letting him go to a torture camp, I had to agree with him, she cried. If I didn't, he would have cut off my credit cards. He would have locked me out of the house. So you served up your grandson instead. She flinched as if I had hit her. She buried her face in her hands and started to wail. It was an ugly, loud sound. Mom, stop it! You need to leave! I don't have anywhere to go, she yelled. The hotel kicked me out. The card declined. I stood there, staring at the woman who had raised me. She had been the enforcer of my father's rules my whole life. She was the one who made sure I never spoke too loudly, never asked for too much, never caused a problem that might upset him. She had chosen her comfort over my safety every single time. And now, the comfort was gone. You can't stay here, I said softly. Mia, please, I'm your mother. You lost the right to use that word a long time ago. I walked over to the front door and opened it wide. If you don't walk out of here right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And then you really will go to jail. She stared at me, looking for a bluff. She didn't find one. Slowly, she got up. She didn't bother brushing off her pants. She walked toward the door, her shoulders slumped, dragging her feet. When she reached the threshold, she stopped and looked back at me. He's going to burn everything down, she whispered. You think you've won because you have that girl from Seattle, but he's not fighting to win anymore. He's just fighting to see you bleed. Goodbye, Mom. She walked out to her car. I watched her struggle to get the keys in the ignition. She backed out slowly and drove away. I locked the door and slid down the wood until I was sitting on the floor. I felt completely drained. The house was quiet, too quiet. I heard a key in the lock a few minutes later. Lucas walked in, carrying a white pharmacy bag. He saw me on the floor and immediately dropped the bag, rushing over. What happened? Are you hurt? My mother was here, I said, leaning my head against his chest. She broke in. She wanted help. Did you give it to her? No. Lucas kissed the top of my head. Good. The next week was a blur of legal maneuvering. Evelyn flew back to Seattle, but she left her deposition with Davis. The DA's office got hold of the power of attorney document my father had tried to force on Evelyn. That was the final nail. The state dropped the custody petition against me immediately. The judge saw it for exactly what it was, a malicious attempt to use the family court system for intimidation. My father was officially denied bail. He was considered a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. We thought we had a moment to breathe. Emil was back in school full-time. Lucas and I went out to dinner for the first time in 6 months. We were sitting at a quiet Italian place downtown, drinking red wine and actually talking about something other than lawyers and indictments. We were talking about taking Emil to the Grand Canyon for spring break. My phone buzzed in my purse. I I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Lucas sighed. Check it. If it's Davis, we need to know. I pulled the phone out. It wasn't Davis. It was an email from my father's lawyer. It was CC'd to me, Davis, Werner, and the district attorney's office. The subject line was just a date, the 14th of November, 2018. I opened the email. There was no text, just an audio file attachment. I looked at Lucas. He sent an audio file. Don't play it here, Lucas said, his face tightening. Wait until we get home. I can't wait. I pulled my headphones out of my purse, plugged them in, and hit play. There was a hiss of static, the sound of a chair scraping against a hard floor. Then, my father's voice. But he sounded different. He didn't sound arrogant. He sounded frantic. I told you, the structural reports were falsified before I bought the land, my father's voice said. Then, another voice answered. An older voice. Calm. Measured. I know they were falsified, son. I paid the inspector to falsify them. If you had done your due diligence instead of rushing the acquisition to impress your golf buddies, you would have seen the soil samples were toxic. But you bought it. It's your problem now. It was Werner. You set me up, my father yelled on the recording. You sold me a poison development site so you could write off the loss through the shell company. I taught you a lesson about reading the fine print. Werner replied coldly. You want the bailout money to fix the soil? You signed the equity of the Scottsdale house over to the trust. You don't own anything anymore. You work for me. The recording clicked off. I sat there, staring at the marinara sauce on my plate. My hands were freezing. Mia? Lucas asked, touching my arm. What is it? It's Werner, I whispered. My father hadn't just been hoarding blackmail on his business partners. He had been recording his own father. And this wasn't about a juvenile record or a secret payoff to a pregnant girl in the 80s. This was federal fraud. Werner had intentionally passed off a toxic, environmentally hazardous development site to his own son's company to avoid federal cleanup fines, and then used it to financially enslave him. They were both monsters. They just wore different suits. My phone rang. It was Davis. Did you get it? She asked. She didn't sound confident anymore. She sounded terrified. I heard it. Mia, the DA just called me. Your father is offering the recordings. He has dozens of them in exchange for a plea deal that drops the federal time down to a minimum security state facility. He's handing them Werner on a silver platter. Werner is 82 years old, I said numbly. The feds don't care. Environmental fraud on that scale? The EPA is already involved. They're going to freeze every single asset connected to Werner's empire by tomorrow morning. I felt the blood drain from my face. The trust. Everything, Davis said, including the joint account he set up for Emil's medical care and college. It's going to be frozen as proceeds of a crime. I hung up the phone. The restaurant chatter around me sounded like static. What? Lucas asked, panic edging into his voice. Mia, talk to me. The money? I said, my voice hollow. The money Werner gave us for Emil. The feds are going to seize it tomorrow. Lucas stared at me. He didn't blink. He just reached across the table, grabbed my hand, and squeezed it so hard my knuckles ground together. Can we move it? He asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Transfer it to our personal account? Right now. Tonight. It's a joint account with Werner, I said, my throat tight. If the feds are watching him, they're watching that routing number. If we move a lump sum of that size the night before a freeze, it's wire fraud. They won't just take the money, they'll indict us. Lucas let go of my hand and ran both of his through his hair. He looked around the restaurant. A couple, 2 tables over, was laughing over a plate of tiramisu. The waiter was uncorking a bottle of wine. Normal life was happening all around us, and we were sitting in the middle of a crater. We can't just let them take it, Lucas said. Mia, that's Emil's future. That's his physical therapy, his next surgery if the fusion doesn't hold. We took out a personal loan for the first one. We maxed out the cards. We finally had breathing room. I looked at the marinara sauce drying on my plate. I thought about Werner sitting on that porch, sipping tea, handing me that bank statement. I'm making up for lost time, he had said. I won't let him take you down with him. It was all a performance. The money wasn't a gift. It was hush money. It was guilt money. He was trying to buy my loyalty just in case his son ever dug up the bodies. And now, my son was going to pay the price. We can't transfer it, I said, my brain finally kicking into gear. But we can spend it, legally. Lucas looked at me, confused. The hospital, I said, pulling my phone out and opening the browser. We have a remaining balance of $12,000 for the post-op care. The physical therapy clinic lets you buy prepaid blocks of sessions. The loan we took out for the surgery, we can make a direct payment to the principal right now. I threw a $50 bill on the table for the dinner and grabbed my purse. Come on. We didn't say a word in the car. Lucas drove perfectly the speed limit. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked near his ear. I sat in the passenger seat with my laptop open on my knees, connected to my phone's hotspot. The screen glowed in the dark of the cabin. I logged into the hospital portal. The balance was sitting right there in bold red numbers, $12,450. I typed in the routing and account numbers for Werner's joint account. My hands were shaking so badly I messed up the sequence twice. Submit. The little loading wheel spun. It felt like it spun for 10 minutes. Then, a green check mark appeared. Payment processed. Hospital is paid, I told Lucas. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the road. Do the loan next. I logged into our bank. The personal loan we had taken out to cover what insurance denied was sitting at a staggering $48,000. The monthly payments were choking us. I clicked Times, make a payment. I selected Times, custom amount. I typed in $48,000. I paused. If I did this, the account would be flagged. A $50,000 payoff at 10 at night on a Thursday. But it wasn't fraud to pay a legitimate, documented medical debt. I hit confirm. Another spinning wheel. Payment pending. It's pending, I said. It won't clear until morning. If the feds freeze Werner's assets at 8 a.m., the bank might reverse it. We just have to hope they don't, Lucas said. He pulled into our driveway. The house was completely dark except for the porch light. The babysitter's car was parked on the street. We walked inside, paid the teenager from down the block, and waited for her to leave. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the laptop again. I went to the physical therapy clinic's website. They didn't have an option to prepay online. I checked the clock. 10:45 p.m. I pulled out my phone and called the clinic's owner, Sarah, on her personal cell. She had given it to me when Emil first started, just in case he had a pain flare-up over the weekend. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy. Mia, is Emil okay? Sarah, I am so sorry to call you this late, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Emil is fine, but we have a financial emergency. Our accounts are being restructured tomorrow morning, and I need to prepay for his next year of therapy right now, tonight, or the funds are going to be tied up in probate for months. It was a lie, but it was close enough to the truth. There was silence on the other end. Mia, I'm in bed. The billing system is at the office. Sarah, please. I have the card number for the joint account. I know you use Square for mobile billing. You can run it on your phone. Please. If I don't do this tonight, Emil loses his therapy. I heard rustling on the other end. A lamp clicking on. Okay, Sarah sighed. Okay, let me open the app. How many sessions are we talking about? 2 sessions a week for 52 weeks. I said. Whatever that total is. That's over $8,000. Run it. I read her the card number. I held my breath while she processed it. It went through. Sarah said. I'll email you the receipt in the morning. Are you guys going to be okay? We're fine. I lied. Thank you, Sarah. You have no idea. I hung up and put my head down on the cool wood of the kitchen table. Lucas came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. We had managed to move about $68,000 into legitimate channels, but there was still over $150,000 sitting in that account. Money that was supposed to go into a 529 plan for Emil's college. Money we couldn't touch without drawing a direct line to ourselves for money laundering. We left it there. We had to. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. At 6 a.m., I got up and made coffee. At 7 a.m., I logged into the joint account portal. The balance was there. $152,300. I refreshed the page at 7:30. Still there. I refreshed it at 8:01. The screen went white. Then, a bold gray error message popped up. Access to this account is currently restricted. Please contact your branch administrator. The freeze was active. The feds had dropped the hammer. I checked my personal bank app. The $48,000 loan payment still said times pending. It was a race now between my bank's clearinghouse and the federal injunction. At 9:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Davis. Are you sitting down? She asked. I'm sitting. The EPA and the FBI raided Werner's corporate offices in Phoenix at dawn, she said. Her voice was pure business, stripped of any empathy. This was survival mode now. They froze everything. Every trust, every shell company, every personal account tied to his social security number. The DA offered your father the deal. He took it. So my father goes to a minimum security resort and Werner goes to federal prison? Werner is 82, Davis corrected. His lawyers are already arguing he's unfit to stand trial due to cognitive decline. He might never see the inside of a cell. But his empire is gone, Mia. The government is seizing the real estate assets to pay for the environmental cleanup in Scottsdale. What about Emil's account? I asked, looking at the error screen on my laptop. Frozen, Davis said. If you try to move a dime of it, they will come after you. I didn't move it, I said carefully. I paid outstanding medical debts last night, directly to the providers. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Davis tapping a pen against her desk. You didn't wire the money to yourself? She asked. No, direct portal payments to the hospital and the loan company. Smart, she said, letting out a breath. It'll piss them off, but it's technically legal to pay a verified debt before a freeze is officially served. They won't bother clawing it back from a hospital. It's too messy. I closed my eyes. The loan was gone. The medical bills were gone. The therapy was paid for. We had lost the college fund, but Emil was safe. There's one more thing, Davis said, her tone shifting. It got lower, more cautious. Your mother called me this morning. I opened my eyes. Why is she calling you? Because your father's legal team formally cut her loose. The retainer ran out and they told her she's on her own. She's trying to hire me. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. To pay you with what? Expired credit cards? She says she has something to trade, Davis said. Something that wasn't in the lockbox. Something Werner didn't even know about. She's lying. She's desperate and she's lying. Mia, she told me where she found it. She said she broke into your house yesterday and took it from your bedroom safe. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the kitchen counter. I didn't bother picking it up. I ran down the hallway, my socks slipping on the hardwood floor, and pushed open the door to our bedroom. I went straight to the closet. We kept a small, fireproof sentry safe on the top shelf, hidden behind a stack of winter sweaters. It wasn't bolted down. It just held our passports, Emil's original birth certificate, our marriage license, and some emergency cash. I threw the sweaters onto the floor. The shelf was empty. I stood there, staring at the blank drywall behind where the safe used to be. My mother hadn't just come over to cry and drink my cooking sherry. She had come to rob me. I walked slowly back to the kitchen. I picked up the phone. Davis was still there saying my name. She took the safe, I said. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It sounded dead. What was in it? Davis asked sharply. Passports, birth certificates, about $2,000 in cash. Mia, think. What else? She told me she has documents that prove you were complicit in the Scottsdale land fraud. She said she has a signed affidavit. There is no affidavit, I yelled, finally losing my grip. I didn't even know about the Scottsdale land fraud until yesterday. I've never signed anything for my father. Then what does she have? I sank into one of the kitchen chairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to mentally catalog every single piece of paper I had ever put into that metal box. Passports, marriage license, Emil's birth certificate, car titles. And then my stomach hit the floor. It wasn't an affidavit. It was a letter. 10 years ago, when I was 22 and fresh out of college, my father had asked me to be the registered agent for a new LLC he was forming. He said it was just a tax thing, a way to help me build credit. He gave me a stack of papers to sign. I didn't read them. I just signed where he put the sticky notes. A month later, Werner had shown up at my apartment. He had handed me a manila envelope and told me to put it in a safe place and never look at it. He told me it was my get-out-of-jail-free card if my father ever tried to pin his bad business deals on me. I had put it in the safe. I had never opened it. Davis, I said, my mouth dry. 10 years ago, I signed incorporation papers for an LLC. I didn't know what it was. What was the name of the LLC? Desert Bloom Holdings. Davis swore under her breath. It was a sharp, ugly word. Mia, Desert Bloom Holdings is the shell company your father used to buy the toxic land in Scottsdale, the one the EPA is investigating. If you are the registered agent, you are legally responsible for the corporate filings. Werner gave me a letter to protect me, I said frantically. He said it would prove my father manipulated me. And your mother just stole it, Davis said, which means she now has the only piece of evidence that exonerates you and the original paperwork that incriminates you. She's going to use it to leverage a deal with the DA for herself. She'll hand you over to the feds to stay out of prison. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the kitchen sink and gripped the edge of the counter until my fingers ached. I looked out the window at the backyard. Emil's plastic swing set was sitting in the morning sun. Lucas's gardening tools were piled next to the back door. It was such a quiet, normal life. We had fought so hard for it. And now, my own mother was going to burn it to the ground. I grabbed my car keys off the hook by the door. Lucas walked into the kitchen, a towel around his neck, fresh out of the shower. Where are you going? He asked, seeing my face. My mother took the safe, I said. She's trying to trade me to the DA. Lucas stopped drying his hair. I'm coming with you. No, stay here. If she calls, keep her on the line. Tell her whatever she wants to hear. Mia, you don't even know where she is. The hotel kicked her out. I know exactly where she is, I said. I drove straight to Scottsdale. I didn't care about speed limits. I didn't care about traffic. I just gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road ahead. She wouldn't go to another cheap motel, not with $2,000 of my cash in her pocket. She would want comfort. She would want something that felt like her old life. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Scottsdale Princess Resort. It was a sprawling, luxury property with manicured lawns and fountains, the kind of place my parents used to go for Sunday brunch before the world fell apart. I walked up to the front desk. The concierge gave me a polite, professional smile. Can I help you? My mother is staying here, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Her name is Elaine Vance. I need her room number. It's a family emergency. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't give out room numbers for security reasons. I can call the room for you? Call it. He picked up the phone, typed in a name, and waited. A moment later, he set it down. There's no answer. Would you like to leave a message? No, I said. I'll wait. I walked over to the lobby bar. It was barely 11 a.m., but there was a woman sitting alone in a plush velvet booth in the corner, staring at a Bloody Mary. She was wearing sunglasses indoors and a massive, wide-brimmed straw hat. It was her. I walked over and slid into the booth across from her. She jumped, nearly spilling her drink. When she saw it was me, she took off the sunglasses. Her eyes were bloodshot and puffy. How did you find me? She asked. She didn't sound angry. She sounded exhausted. Where is the safe, Mom? She picked up her drink and took a slow sip. Her hands were shaking so badly the celery stalk rattled against the glass. It's upstairs, she said. In the room. The bellboy had to carry it up for me. Give me the key. She shook her head. I can't, Mia. I already called the DA's office. I left a message for the lead prosecutor. I told them I have documents proving you set up the shell company for your father. I told them I'd hand it over for blanket immunity. I leaned across the table. I didn't yell. I just looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the terrifying, perfectly put together woman who used to critique my weight and my grades. I saw a terrified, aging woman who had never learned how to exist without someone else paying the bill. Mom, I said quietly, if you give them that safe, they won't give you immunity. They'll ask why you had it. They'll ask why you broke into my house to steal it. You're trying to play a game with federal prosecutors and you don't even know the rules. They will eat you alive. She stared at me. Her bottom lip trembled. I don't want to go to jail, she whispered, a tear leaking out of the corner of her eye. Your father told them I managed the books for the camp. He showed them emails. He set me up. I know he did, I said. He set me up too. That's what the letter in the safe proves. It's from Werner. It details exactly how Dad forged my signature and used my name for the shell company. If you give that to the feds without me, they won't care about you. They'll just use it to build their case. But if we give it to them together, I paused, letting the silence hang between us. Together? She asked, her voice cracking. Give me the room key, I said. We get the safe. We take it to Davis. We walk into the DA's office as a united front. Two victims of a malignant narcissist who forced us to sign things under duress. Davis can negotiate immunity for both of us, but if you try to do this alone, you're going down. It was a bluff. A massive, desperate bluff. I didn't know if Davis could get her immunity. I honestly didn't care if my mother went to prison. I just needed my passports and that letter. She looked down at her drink. Then, slowly, she reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a white plastic key card and slid it across the table. Room 412, she whispered. I took the card. I stood up. Wait here, I said. I walked to the elevators. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I got to the 4th floor, found the room, and swiped the card. The light blinked green. I pushed the door open. The room was a mess. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Room service trays were stacked on the desk. And sitting on the bed, looking entirely out of place on the crisp white duvet, was my gray Sentry safe. It was still locked. She didn't know the combination. I walked over, punched in the code, and popped the lid. My passports were there. The cash was there. And tucked underneath all of it was the thick, sealed manila envelope Werner had given me 10 years ago. I grabbed it. I didn't open it. I just shoved it into my purse, grabbed the cash, and closed the safe. I walked out of the room, took the elevator down to the lobby, and walked straight out the front doors to my car. I didn't go back to the bar. I didn't say goodbye to my mother. I got into the car, locked the doors, and called Davis. I have the letter, I said, putting the car in drive. I'm coming to your office right now. Where is your mother? Davis asked. Sitting in a hotel bar waiting for me to save her, I said. Are you going to? I pulled out onto the main road, the Arizona sun glaring off the windshield. I thought about Emil's terrified eyes at Thanksgiving. I thought about the lockbox. I thought about Evelyn in Seattle, growing up without a father because Werner had bought her off to protect the family name. No, I said. I'm done saving them. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The drive from Scottsdale to Davis's office in downtown Phoenix took 45 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the dull, rhythmic throbbing behind my eyes. I parked in the concrete garage under Davis's building. I didn't bother checking the rearview mirror to see what I looked like. I grabbed my purse, feeling the thick, rigid weight of the manila envelope inside, and walked to the elevator. Davis was waiting for me in her office suite. She didn't look like the polished, unflappable attorney who had intimidated my father's legal team. Her blazer was draped over the back of a chair, her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, and her desk was covered in printed emails and legal pads. I walked in, unzipped my purse, and dropped the envelope right in the center of her desk. Is that it? She asked. That's it. It's been sealed for 10 years. She picked up a silver letter opener. She didn't ask about my mother. She didn't ask how I got it. She just slid the blade under the flap and sliced it open. Inside was a stack of paper clipped together, maybe 20 pages thick. On top was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery with Werner's personal letterhead at the top. Davis picked it up and read it in silence. Her eyes tracked back and forth across the page. Halfway down, she stopped. She read a paragraph again. Her jaw tightened. What does it say? I asked, my voice tight. Davis didn't answer immediately. She set the letter down and started flipping through the clipped pages underneath. They were bank records, transfer receipts, and a copy of the LLC incorporation document bearing my signature. But there were sticky notes attached to several of the pages. Notes in Werner's handwriting. She let out a long, slow breath and leaned back in her chair. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Mia, she said quietly. Werner didn't didn't give you this to protect you. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. He said it was a failsafe. He said it proved my dad tricked me. It does prove that, Davis said, putting her glasses back on, but it proves something else too. Look at this. She turned the letter around and pushed it across the desk. I leaned forward. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of penmanship you don't see anymore. It was dated the 14th of October, 2016. To whom it may concern, the bearer of this document, Mia Vance, acted as a blind signatory in the formation of Desert Bloom Holdings. She was instructed to do so by her father. However, the instruction for him to utilize her as a corporate shield came directly from me. I stopped reading. My stomach plummeted. I looked up at Davis. Read the next paragraph, she instructed. I provided the capital for the Scottsdale acquisition, knowing the environmental surveys were fraudulent. My son believed he was outsmarting me by securing the land under a subsidiary. I allowed him to believe this. I mandated that he use a family member as the registered agent to ensure that, should the EPA ever investigate the toxicity of the site, the liability would bypass his personal estate and land squarely on his daughter. This gave me absolute leverage. My son will not cross me, because he knows I hold the evidence of his fraud, and if he ever attempts to usurp my control of the trust, I will release these documents, effectively sending both him and his daughter to federal prison. I couldn't breathe. I literally forgot how to draw air into my lungs. He wasn't saving you, Mia, Davis said softly. He was holding you hostage. You were his insurance policy against your father. This envelope wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was a loaded gun he kept in your closet, just in case he ever needed to pull the trigger. I stared at the cream-colored paper. I had kept this in my bedroom for 10 years. I had slept 20 feet away from it. Werner had handed it to me with a kind smile, patting my hand, telling me he was looking out for me. Why did he give it to me? I whispered. If it incriminates him, why let me hold it? Arrogance, Davis said. And control. He sealed it. He told you never to open it. He knew you were so conditioned to obey the rules of your family that you would never break the seal unless he gave you permission. And he was right. You didn't open it until today. I felt a sudden violent wave of nausea. I stood up and walked over to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. I looked down at the traffic crawling along the street below. They were all the same. My father wanted to put Emil in a cage to save a buck. My mother wanted to trade me to the DA to save herself. And Werner, the grandfather who had paid for Emil's surgery, the man I thought was the only decent one left, had deliberately set me up to take the fall for a federal environmental crime just to keep his son on a leash. Can we use it? I asked, not turning around. Yes, Davis said, her lawyer brain snapping back into focus. We can. It's a signed confession of federal conspiracy, fraud, and extortion. It completely exonerates you by proving you were a victim of a coordinated, multi-generational fraud scheme. The DA will drool over this. They'll give you blanket immunity before we even sit down. And Werner? Werner goes down, hard. He won't just lose the money. The DOJ will go after his personal estate, his past developments, everything. And your father goes down for executing the fraud. I turned around. Do it. Call them. Davis picked up her phone. I'm calling the lead prosecutor now. We're going to set up a proffer session for tomorrow morning. You bring this envelope, you sit in a room with the feds, and you hand them the keys to the castle. I nodded. I picked up my purse and walked out. The drive home was a blur. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt cold. A deep, settling cold that seemed to sink right into my bones. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like roasted garlic and tomatoes. Lucas was at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. Emil was sitting at the kitchen table, meticulously coloring a picture of a triceratops. It was so normal. It was so desperately, beautifully normal. Lucas looked up as I dropped my keys on the counter. He saw my face, and the wooden spoon stopped moving. He turned the burner off and walked over to me. Mia, what happened? Did you get the safe from your mom? I got the envelope, I said. My voice was monotone. Does it clear you? Yes. I looked at him. Werner set it up. He told my dad to use my name so I would be the fall guy if the EPA ever came knocking. He gave me the envelope 10 years ago so he could hold it over my dad's head. I was collateral. Lucas just stared at me. He didn't swear. He didn't shout. He just reached out and pulled me against his chest. I didn't cry. I just leaned my weight against him, feeling the steady thud of his heart. We're burning it down, I told his shirt. All of it. I'm taking it to the DA tomorrow. Good, Lucas said fiercely. Burn it to the ground. Mommy? I pulled back and looked at the kitchen table. Emil had stopped coloring. He was looking at us, his brown eyes wide and serious. Yeah, buddy? I asked, forcing a smile onto my face. Is Grandpa Werner a bad guy too? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I thought about the bank account, the money that had paid for Emil's spine, the money that had fixed my son. It was dirty money. It was blood money built on ruined land and ruined lives. Yes, I said. He is. Emil looked down at his coloring book. He carefully capped his green marker. Okay, that's okay. We don't need him. I walked over and kissed the top of his head. No, we don't. The next morning, Davis and I walked into the federal building in downtown Phoenix. The air conditioning was cranked so high I was shivering before we even got through the metal detectors. We were escorted to a windowless conference room on the 6th floor. There were 3 people waiting for us, 2 suited FBI agents and an assistant U.S. attorney named Harper. She looked to be about my age, sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense bob and a stack of legal pads in front of her. Miss Vance, Harper said, gesturing to a chair. Take a seat. I sat down. Davis sat next to me and immediately took control of the room. My client is here voluntarily, Davis stated, her voice projecting absolute authority. She has documentation that unravels the entire corporate structure of Desert Bloom Holdings, including the fraudulent environmental surveys and the systemic extortion utilized to maintain control of the LLC. Before she hands anything over, we are executing the immunity agreement. Harper looked at me. If the documents contain what you say they contain, the immunity is yours. But you understand this means you will be called to testify before a federal grand jury against your father and your grandfather. I understand. Harper pushed a document across the table. I signed it without reading it. I didn't care what it said. I just wanted it over. Davis opened her briefcase and pulled out the cream-colored letter. She slid it across the table. Harper picked it up. The 2 FBI agents leaned in. The room went dead silent as they read Werner's confession. I watched Harper's face. I watched her eyes widen slightly, a tiny crack in her professional armor. She finished reading it, set it down, and looked at the agents. One of them let out a low whistle. This is the Holy Grail, the agent muttered. He put it in writing, Harper said, shaking her head. The arrogance. Do we have a deal? Davis asked. You have a deal, Harper said. said, looking directly at me. Mia, you're clear. You're out of the crosshairs. But you need to know what happens next. We are moving to unseal the indictments against Werner Vance this afternoon. Warrants will be issued. The media is going to catch wind of this by tomorrow morning. Your family is going to be the lead story on every local network, and probably national. I know. And the assets? Harper continued, her voice softening just a fraction. The freeze on the joint account your grandfather opened. It's permanent. That money will be seized under RICO statutes. We cannot release it to you. Keep it, I said. I don't want it. We walked out of the building an hour later. The Arizona heat hit me like a physical blow after the freezing conference room. Davis stopped on the sidewalk and put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, she said. It's going to be ugly for a while, but you cut the cancer out. When do they arrest him? I asked. Usually within 48 hours. They have to coordinate with local law enforcement, given his age and location. I nodded, got in my car, and drove home. I felt lighter. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's secrets. I had handed them over to the government. It wasn't my problem anymore. I pulled into my driveway. Lucas's car was parked in its usual spot, but there was another car parked behind it, a silver rental sedan. My stomach tightened. I thought of my mother, breaking into my house again. I gripped the steering wheel, ready to back out and call the police. But then, the front door of my house opened. Lucas walked out onto the porch. He didn't look angry or panicked. He looked confused. Behind him, a woman stepped out of my house. She was wearing dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and carrying a leather tote bag. She had my dark hair, my nose, my exact height. It was Evelyn. I turned off the car and got out. My legs felt slightly numb as I walked up the driveway. Evelyn walked down the porch steps to meet me. Up close, the resemblance was even more jarring. She looked like a ghost of what I could have been if I had grown up outside of the Vance family ecosystem. I'm sorry for showing up unannounced, she said. Her voice was just like it had been on the phone, warm but cautious. Lucas said you were at a meeting. He let me wait inside. It's okay, I said, still processing that she was actually standing in my front yard. I thought you were in Seattle. Davis said you flew back. I did, Evelyn said. She gripped the straps of her tote bag. I went back to pack up my house. I'm putting it on the market. But before I did, I went through some old boxes of my mother's things in the attic. I found something, and I couldn't just email it to a lawyer. I had to bring it to you. I looked at Lucas. He gave me a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Let's go inside, I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had sat crying, where my father had tried to threaten me through the door. Now, my half-sister was sitting across from me. Evelyn unzipped her tote bag and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. It looked like an old day planner from the late 80s. When Werner came to Seattle in 1989, Evelyn started, her voice tight. He told you he paid my mother off to protect her. He told you he gave her $250,000 to give me a clean slate. That's what he told me, I confirmed. He showed me the trust documents. Evelyn slid the leather book across the table. My mother kept a diary. She wasn't a receptionist at the lockdown facility, Mia. That was a lie Werner told you to make it sound like a tragic workplace romance. I frowned, looking at the book but not touching it. Then who was she? She was a patient, Evelyn said. The words hit me like a physical strike. She was committed to the same facility your father was in, Evelyn continued, her voice shaking with a quiet, suppressed rage. She was 18 years old, dealing with severe depression. Your father was there for arson. He manipulated her. He used her. And when she got pregnant, the facility panicked. A pregnancy on a high-security psychiatric ward is a massive liability. I stared at Evelyn. Werner knew. Of course he knew, Evelyn said bitterly. He was the facility's silent financial backer. He owned the land the hospital was built on. He didn't pay my mother to protect her from your father. He paid her to protect the hospital from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. He bought her silence, dumped her in Seattle, and set up a trust fund to make sure she never sued. I closed my eyes. The layers of deception never stopped. Every time I thought I had hit the bedrock of Werner's lies, the floor gave out again. He hadn't just protected a malignant narcissist. He had actively funded the institution that allowed the abuse to happen, and then covered it up to protect his own real estate investment. I brought it to you, Evelyn said softly, because I thought you should know who you were really dealing with before you went to the authorities. I just came from the DA's office, I said, opening my eyes. I gave them his written confession regarding a massive real estate fraud in Scottsdale. They are unsealing the indictments today. They're going to arrest him. Evelyn stopped. She looked at the diary on the table. So, it's over? Yes, I said. It's over. But as the words left my mouth, my cell phone started vibrating in my purse. I reached in and pulled it out. The caller ID was a restricted number. I didn't want to answer it, but a strange, awful instinct told me I had to. I hit accept and put it on speaker, setting it down on the table between me, Lucas, and Evelyn. Hello? I said. There was a soft, papery sigh on the other end of the line. You always were the stubborn one, Mia. It was Werner. His voice didn't sound raspy or weak like it had on the porch of the ranch. It sounded sharp, clear. I looked at Evelyn. She went completely still, recognizing the voice of the man who had erased her mother. How did you get this number? I asked. I bought the cell phone company's local infrastructure 10 years ago, Werner said calmly. I get a lot of things. I also get alerts when federal warrants are requested against my name. My blood ran cold. The feds hadn't even unsealed the indictments yet. Harper had said it would take 48 hours. You went to the DA, Werner stated. It wasn't a question. You gave them the envelope. I gave them everything, I said, leaning closer to the phone. I gave them the shell company, the blackmail, the environmental fraud. They know you orchestrated it. They know you set my dad up. They know you set me up. I protected my assets, Werner corrected smoothly. Your father is a liability. I simply built a firewall. You're going to prison, Werner, he chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. Mia, I am 82 years old with documented early-stage dementia. My doctors have already signed the affidavits. I will never see a courtroom. I will be placed under house arrest at my estate, monitored by private nurses that I employ. They're taking your money, I countered, my voice rising. They're seizing the trust. They're taking the accounts. Let them, Werner said. The domestic accounts are a fraction of the portfolio. The real money has been offshore since 1995. They can take the Scottsdale properties. They can take the shell companies. It's the cost of doing business. He paused, and the silence on the line felt heavy and suffocating. But you broke the rules, Mia, Werner said, his voice dropping an octave. You brought outsiders into family business. You went to the government. You're not a family, I spat. You're a syndicate. Perhaps, he agreed. Which is why I'm calling, to tell you that since you've decided to align yourself with the federal government, I am no longer protecting you. I don't need need your protection. I have immunity. Immunity from the government, yes, Werner said, but not from your father. You see, when I got the alert about the warrants this morning, I made a phone call. I called your father's legal team. I informed them that you were the one who provided the DA with the documents. I felt Lucas grab my hand under the table. My father is in jail, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He can't do anything. He just took a plea deal, Mia. Werner reminded me. He's cooperating with the feds now. He's a star witness. They granted him bail this morning as part of his cooperation agreement. He was released an hour ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. Released. My father was out. He knows you betrayed him, Werner said softly. He knows you sold him out to save yourself, and you know how he handles betrayal. Why are you doing this? I demanded, tears of pure frustration finally pricking my eyes. If you're so untouchable, why do you care? Because you were supposed to be the smart one, Werner said. You were supposed to play your part. Now, you get to deal with the monster you unleashed. Goodbye, Mia. The line went dead. I sat staring at the black screen of the phone. The quiet of the kitchen suddenly felt oppressive. He's out, Lucas whispered. He's out, Evelyn echoed, her face pale. She had just driven across the country to confront the legacy of a man who was now walking the streets, knowing exactly who put him in the crosshairs. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the tile. Lucas, go get a meal from his room, I ordered, my voice trembling but loud. Pack a bag. 3 days of clothes. Evelyn, get back in your car. Where are we going? Evelyn asked, standing up quickly. I don't know, I said, grabbing my purse and the keys I had just set down. But my father knows where I live. He knows Emil's school schedule. He knows I have the one thing that put him away, and he has nothing left to lose. I ran to the front window and pulled the blind back just an inch. The street was quiet. The suburban lawns were bright in the midday sun. But parked at the very end of the cul-de-sac, idling next to the stop sign, was a black SUV with tinted windows. It wasn't a police cruiser. It wasn't the feds. It was the same SUV that had dropped off the blackmail ledger. Marcus, my father's fixer. The brake lights flashed, and the SUV began to roll slowly down the street, creeping toward our driveway. I let the blind snap back into place. It's Marcus, I said, the panic turning into a hard, cold knot in my stomach. He's stopping at the end of the driveway. Lucas didn't hesitate. He didn't run for the back door or tell us to hide. He walked straight into the kitchen, pulled open the utility drawer, and took out a heavy metal maglite flashlight. Call Davis, he said to me. Call the prosecutor. Tell them your father is sending his people to our house. I'm going out there. Lucas. No, I started, reaching for his arm. I'm not letting him box us in, Lucas said. His voice was completely level. He opened the front door and walked out onto the porch, leaving it open behind him. Evelyn and I stood in the hallway, holding our breath. I had my phone to my ear, listening to it ring as Davis's office connected me to Harper. Through the screen door, I watched the black SUV idle in the street. The driver's side window rolled down. Lucas stopped at the edge of the grass, the heavy flashlight gripped in his right hand. He didn't raise it, but he didn't hide it either. Marcus leaned an arm out the window. He didn't look like a menacing enforcer. He just looked exhausted. The Arizona sun caught the deep lines around his mouth. I'm not here to start anything, Lucas, Marcus called out. His voice carried clearly over the quiet street. Put the flashlight down. I'm just making a delivery. He reached over to his passenger seat and picked up a thick, padded envelope. He tossed it out the window. It landed on the edge of my lawn with a dull thud. Your father called me 20 minutes ago, Marcus said. He told me to come here, cut the power lines to the house, and wait for him to arrive. He wants to make a point. He wants Mia in the dark when he gets here. My blood turned to ice. Why didn't you? Lucas asked, not moving toward the envelope. Because he just spent 4 hours in a federal proffer room trading every name in his Rolodex for bail, Marcus said bitterly. He gave up the shell companies, he gave up Werner, and he gave up me. I got a tip from a friend in the clerk's office. The feds are raiding my accounting firm in an hour. He burned me to save himself. I'm not doing his dirty work anymore. Marcus pointed a finger at the envelope on the grass. That's Werner's offshore ledger, Marcus said. Cayman, Isle of Man, Switzerland, the accounts he thinks the feds don't know about. I manage the transfers for him. Give it to your lawyer. Tell the DA they can freeze the old man's entire safety net. He wants to play God from his estate? Let him do it broke. Marcus rolled the window up. Your father is 10 minutes behind me. Call the cops. The SUV pulled away, accelerating rapidly down the street, turning the corner, and disappearing. Lucas walked over, picked up the envelope, and came back inside. He locked the deadbolt behind him. Harper, I said into the phone, realizing the line had connected and the prosecutor had been listening. Did you hear that? I heard it, Harper said. Her voice was pure steel. He violated the terms of his release the second he instructed a third party to approach your residence. I am dispatching 2 squad cars to your street right now. They will sit at the corners out of sight. Do not go outside. If he comes to the door, let him knock. He's coming to cut the power, I said, my voice shaking. He won't get the chance, Harper promised. Stay away from the windows. We sat in the living room. Lucas put the heavy envelope on the coffee table. Nobody touched it. Evelyn sat next to me on the sofa. She reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were freezing, but her grip was strong. We were 2 strangers who shared half our DNA, sitting in the quiet, waiting for the monster who gave it to us. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't move to the window. I just listened. A car door slammed. It wasn't the heavy, solid thud of my father's old Mercedes. It sounded hollow, like a cheap rental. He had lost the cars, the house, the prestige. He was driving here in a rented compact car to try and terrify me into submission. Footsteps on the concrete walkway. Heavy, purposeful. I stood up. Mia, don't! Lucas whispered. I'm not hiding from him, I said. Not anymore. I walked into the hallway and stood directly in front of the door. Evelyn stood up and followed me. She didn't say a word. She just came and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. The doorknob rattled. He expected it to be open. When it didn't give, he pounded a fist against the wood. Mia! My father's voice barked through the door. It wasn't the smooth, polished tone of the real estate mogul. It was the raw, jagged voice of a cornered animal. Open this door. I know what you did. I know you gave them the envelope. I didn't answer. You think you're safe because they gave you a piece of paper? He yelled. I'm cooperating, Mia. I'm their star witness now. I walk. Werner rots. And I walk. But I am going to make sure every dime you have is tied up in civil litigation for the rest of your natural life. Open the door. I unlocked the deadbolt. Lucas tensed behind me, but I pulled the door open. My father was standing on the porch. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and he had dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. He raised his hand, ready to point a finger at my face, to launch into the tirade he had used to control me me since I was a child, but then he saw Evelyn. His hand stopped in midair. He stared at her. The arrogant fury drained out of his face, replaced by a sudden, jarring confusion. He looked at me, then back at Evelyn. "You didn't win," I said to him, my voice completely steady. "You didn't beat Werner. You didn't beat me. You just burned down the only people who would have ever visited you." "Who is she?" he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn, though the slight waver in his voice told me he already knew. He recognized the ghost of the girl he had locked away in 1989. "Her name is Evelyn," I said. "She's your daughter, and she's the one who gave the DA the power of attorney form you tried to force her to sign. You didn't just get caught on Werner's shell company, Dad. You got caught trying to defraud her." He took a step back. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. He looked at Evelyn, looking for some kind of crack, some kind of weakness he could exploit. Evelyn just stared back at him with pure, unadulterated pity. "You're nothing," Evelyn told him. "You're just a sick, sad old man." Before he could respond, the street lit up. Red and blue lights strobed across the front of my house, bouncing off the windows and the porch columns. 2 police cruisers had pulled up silently, blocking his rental car in the driveway. 4 officers stepped out, their hands resting on their utility belts. "Robert Vance," one of the officers called out, walking up the driveway. "Put your hands where we can see them. Your bail has been revoked." My father didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stood there as the officers walked up the steps, turned him around, and snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists. He looked over his shoulder at me as they led him down the steps. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked small, exactly the way he had looked at Thanksgiving when Werner had threatened him. He was a bully who had finally run out of victims. I watched them put him in the back of the cruiser. I watched the taillights fade down the street. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt one last time. It didn't end in a dramatic courtroom showdown. Real life rarely does. It ended in a series of quiet, devastating legal maneuvers that dismantled the Vance legacy piece by piece. Harper used Marcus's ledger to track Werner's offshore accounts. The seizure was absolute. Werner's legal team tried to fight it, but the paper trail was airtight. Stripped of his wealth, Werner couldn't afford the private medical estate he had planned for his house arrest. He was transferred to a state-run medical facility for inmates. He died there 8 months later, alone, his mind completely gone. He didn't even remember his own name at the end. My father's plea deal was thrown out the window the second he violated his bail. With the new fraud charges Evelyn brought against him, and the obstruction charges from trying to intimidate me, the judge threw the book at him. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. He won't get out until he is well into his 70s. My mother moved to Florida. She lives in a small condo paid for by her sister. We don't speak. Occasionally, she sends a birthday card for a meal with a $10 bill inside. I put the money in his piggy bank and throw the card away. The money from the joint account was seized, just as Davis predicted, but we didn't need it. Without the constant suffocating weight of my family's demands and the legal threats hanging over us, Lucas and I thrived. Lucas got a promotion. I went back to work part-time as a graphic designer. We paid off the remaining medical debt slowly, month by month, with our own money, clean money. Evelyn moved back to Seattle, but we didn't stay strangers. We talk on the phone every Sunday. Last summer, she and her son flew down to Arizona, and we took the boys to the Grand Canyon. We stood on the edge of the rim, looking out at the vast, open expanse of the world, and for the first time, I felt like I actually belonged in it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when I finally knew it was really over. I was sitting on the back patio, drinking a cup of coffee. The weather had finally broken, and the air was crisp. Lucas was in the yard, raking leaves into a pile. Emil ran out the back door. He was 10 now. He was taller, his shoulders broad, his spine perfectly straight. He didn't rub his back anymore. He didn't flinch when doors slammed. He just ran across the grass, grabbed a handful of dry leaves, and threw them at his dad, laughing out loud. Lucas dropped the rake, chased him down, and scooped him up over his shoulder. Emil shrieked with joy, the sound echoing off the wooden fence and floating up into the clear blue sky. I sat back in my chair, holding my warm mug. I didn't have a trust fund. I didn't have a sprawling estate in Scottsdale. I didn't have a family name that opened doors. But looking at my husband and my son, completely safe, completely free, I had everything.